So to start out, this is what's called a converse statement, is when we kind of flip around the order of what we are talking about. In the previous video, we talked about when we have parallel lines, then there was something special about alternate interior, alternate exterior, and corresponding angles, that they were all congruent. Now we're going to flip it around and say, well, when those types of angles are congruent, there's something special about our lines. And when we have this congruence relationship present with these three types of angles, we have parallel lines present. And when same side interior and same side exterior angles, when they add up to be 180 and they're supplementary, then there's something special going on with our lines. They are in fact parallel. Okay? So now we're going to start doing problems where maybe the lines aren't marked parallel, but we will have information to conclude that they must be parallel, and we can mark them as being parallel. So the other possibility here is, well, what if alternate interior, alternate exterior, or corresponding angles aren't congruent? Well, that means we just don't have parallel lines. And the same thing's true with same side interior and same side exterior angles. When they don't add up to be 180, all that means is you don't have parallel lines. So example 4 here, continuing on from the lesson the other day. Determine whether the two lines are parallel. Explain your reasoning in words. All right, so for part A here, we have two angles. We have a 59 and a 58. And the first thing I notice here is that these two angles are corresponding angles. Okay? Now, if corresponding angles are congruent, we've got parallel lines. And I don't have congruent corresponding angles. So I don't have parallel lines. So if I were to explain in words why these two lines are not parallel, we'd say the lines are not parallel. I'm just going to use the parallel symbol here because the corresponding angles, and I'm just abbreviating a bunch in here, the corresponding angles are not congruent. And that would be my reasoning for that. If they were congruent, we would have parallel lines. All right, let's look at the flip side here. Part B. Well, let's see. We got a 120 and a 120. What type of angles are these? They're still corresponding, and they are congruent. So we'll say for part B, the lines are parallel. Why? Because the corresponding angles are congruent. So since these lines are congruent, take that back. Since these corresponding angles are congruent and these lines are parallel, well, they aren't marked as parallel, so guess what I get to do? I get to come over here now and say, boom, that line is parallel to that line. I know that's true. Even though it wasn't marked, this information's telling me that, hey, I get to mark this on the problem. Okay, so not every time will parallel lines be marked as parallel. You might have to, prove why they must be parallel. All right, second question has 3 parts here. It says, use the given information to determine which lines, if any, must be parallel. Okay, so it's looking like C and D may or may not be parallel. We have to figure that out. And it looks like maybe R and S might be parallel. Just depends on the information. So let's look at the first part here. Angle 7 is congruent to angle 12. So if angle 7 and angle 12, if they're congruent to each other, well, what type of angles are these? Okay. Here's the thing. I'm going to give you a big hint here. Not really a little hint, big hint. If you want to try to determine which lines in question are parallel or not, whatever one line these two angles have in common. These two angles, for example, are both on line D. These two angles, both together, are not on one singular line, right? Because angle 7's only on R, 12's not on R. 12's on S, but 7's not on S, and neither angle's on C. So this, whatever line both angles are on, that is your transversal. So the lines that we're questioning in this case would be R and S. So if you kind of tilt your head to the right or turn your paper to the left, turn it counterclockwise, do these types of angles, 7 and 12, have a particular name with each other? And you start to go, yeah, they do. They're alternate interior angles. And what are we saying is true about these alternate interior angles? Well, we're saying, hey, they're congruent. So if these two angles are congruent, if alternate interior angles are congruent, is that enough information to conclude that we do in fact have parallel lines? And yes, that is true. So we may conclude, get rid of some of my more markings here, there we go, get that one back. We may conclude that R is parallel to S. Because we have, since 7 and 12 are congruent alternate interior angles, therefore line R is parallel to line S. All right, let's try the next one here. We're going to say, what if this is true? What if angle 7, which is right here, is congruent to angle 10? All right, now which lines, if any, are parallel? Well, let's try to find the transversal that connects 7 and 10. Well, we're starting to run into a problem, though, because 7 uses line R and it uses line D, and 10 uses line C and it uses line D. Those two angles don't have a line in common with each other, right? So there is no transversal, and if there's no transversal, that means these angles have nothing going on together. They're not special. So our final answer is there's nothing parallel. We would need to know some more information to make any kind of conclusion about lines being parallel. All right, let's try the last one. If 2 and 3 are supplementary, well, here's 2, here's 3. Let's find the magic transversal that connects them. Well, that would be line R, which means our lines in question would be C and D. So can we show that line C is parallel to line D? Well, 2 and 3, let's look. These are same side interior angles. And they told us that angles 2 and 3 are supplementary. So if same side interior angles are supplementary, which they're saying they are, was that enough information to conclude that we had parallel lines? And the answer is yes, that was enough information. Therefore, we may conclude that C is in fact parallel to D. Now, the last example, I want you guys to try this one on your own, okay? And I put a little thing down here. This is what you need to be thinking to yourself as you're looking at this problem. And you guys are going to have to fill in the blanks. I'm not going to do them for you. But this is kind of your mantra you need to be thinking about. Since those two angles, and by those two angles I mean the 62 and the 7x minus 8. So think about, here's the 62, here's the 7x minus 8. Since those two angles are blank, what name angles are those? Then they need to be what? What relationship do they have to have with each other? Do they need to be congruent or do they need to be supplementary? Because those are the only two scenarios that we've talked about. Or let me backtrack here a little bit. Since those two angles are what type of angles they are, then they need to be blank in order to produce parallel lines. Because I'm asking, what value of x would make A parallel to B? Okay, I'm not saying A is parallel to B. I want A to be parallel to B. But A will only be parallel to B if something special happens with these angles. And there's only one particular value of x that is going to make that happen. So make it happen, and we'll talk about it tomorrow in class.